Hello everyone! Welcome back to my video channel Nasydyanka. I have prepared a very lengthy, deep, again one of my hot topics for today, as we are celebrating the holy and equal to the apostles Saint Cyril the philosopher. This year, this day happens to be right after Forgiveness Sunday, and so this comes as a bonus video that I was ready and eager to share with you guys. I tried to break down the information. It was a lot, and I did my best, but I have a sense that this is going to require some thought, and in advance, I'm thankful to you all for your support. And I should also say before I start that I'm additionally thankful for the kind words and support that many of you have sent me, because clearly I am not a professional in video editing. I do not know how to make videos. I work as a full-time clinical therapist. I'm not a video editor. But I also happen to be Bulgarian, and I have a passion for the Bulgarian culture and traditions and faith. And so this so far has been a hobby, and I am presenting it out of pure love for what I do. And I hope that in time I can begin to upgrade how I make my videos. That being said, it's one of the reasons why I chose to keep it as it is for right now. I'm realizing that the screen is not a full screen, and many of you may be watching this on a big TV. If you're watching it on cell phones, it may not be that big of a deal. But as of now, I am just focusing on sharing with you guys in a very simple, ordinary way some very deep pieces of information that most of our schools, whether you are in the West or in the East, have not addressed. And yeah, I'm just happy to share that. So welcome, and I appreciate your patience with me. My coffee tastes amazing today. I added some cinnamon to it, and it's just splendid. I used to add cardamom. I don't know how you all drink your coffee. I'd be happy to hear if you want to share leave a comment. But with cinnamon, it tastes awesome. So I have divided this material into several parts, and I believe that I can fit it into one video. So Saint Constantine is also called Cyril the philosopher, and in Bulgarian language we call him Cyril. He's also called the holy and equal to the apostles Cyril, teacher of the Slavs. In Bulgaria we know him as Saint Cyril Slavo-Bulgarian. He's commemorated and celebrated on February this year. That's the day after the Forgiveness Sunday, and he's also celebrated together with his brother Saint Methodius in May. I will make a separate video in the future. That's my plan. So maybe by then I will know how to upgrade my videos and include some music for you guys and some pictures. I have heard a lot of demands for this, and that would be awesome, so long that I can take the time to upgrade and learn how this goes. So far I'll just talk to you about him. So his name is Constantine Kirill, or Cyril the philosopher. He came from the Bulgarian Slavs in the Thessaloniki region. In Bulgarian we actually call this the Solonsky region. So we call the Thessaloniki Brothers Solunskite Bratya. But I'll just stick to the Thessaloniki word. That's what I found was the correct translation in English. He was the youngest of 7 children of the distinguished Christians Leo and Maria. And he had an attraction from early on to learning. So he ended up studying in the Magnaur school. So this in Bulgarian language is called the Magnaurskata Shkola. This was a school at the time that was the highest and most prestigious school in the Byzantine Empire. It was founded in 425 AD. It got its name from the Magnaura Palace, in which it was housed around 855 AD. Imperial children and the members of the high Byzantine aristocracy received their education there. And so in some cases, some high-ranking foreigners who were preparing for future state, country, and church careers in their native countries would also go there. By the way, this is quite typical of Bulgarians. We do have this maybe like a nationalistic kind of tendency to immigrate to foreign countries where we obtain the best of knowledge, studies, and resources, and then we take those learned skills back to our country, our people, our families. We love to support each other in that way. Many of us might have noticed. So for his great zeal in the knowledge of God, of the faith, the Orthodox Christian faith, Saint Cyril was ordained a deacon. He was appointed a teacher at the school, and he also received the nickname of a philosopher. He was sent by the Byzantine emperor to defend the true faith, Orthodox Christian faith, in a number of theological conversations, along with the iconoclast John the Grammaticus, with the Muslim Saracens. I had to really look for translations, you guys, if you bear with me. With the Jewish Khazars, with the pagan Alans. And as a result of all this, hundreds of people came to know the truth about the Orthodox Christian Church, and so they were baptized by their own will. The two brothers were Slavic educators, and so they had to go to Rome and defend their cause from the enemies in front of the Pope himself. Things get more and more detailed, and they get more heated as they get more detailed. So I'm going to continue introducing you slowly to what's going on actually here and what happened in that era. So various commissions of a public nature were assigned to Constantine the philosopher, Saint Cyril. He became bored with the vanity of this secular world, so he settled with his brother Saint Methodius in the monastery Saint Polychron, which was located in Asia Minor, in present-day Bursa. He chose to take monastic vows with the name of Cyril. There, he performed his memorable work in throughout fasting and prayer, so that he would create a Slavic alphabet and translate the holy books of the Orthodox Church into one common language that the Thessaloniki Bulgarians of that region, would understand. They compiled the Bulgarian Slavic alphabet in 855 AD, and we know from popular sources, with it, they actually translated a number of liturgical books in the Old Bulgarian language. Armed with this new alphabet and books, the two brothers were welcomed by Bulgarians and Slavs to preach Christianity to them in their native language, and to baptize them, first in Bulgaria, which happened by a river that's called Bregalnica, near the town of Shtip, near the ancient fortress of Raven, and they baptized around 54,000 individuals. And then they proceeded forward to Moravia and Pannonia. In Rome, Saint Cyril fell seriously ill. He was tonsured into a monastery with the name Cyril, as I mentioned, and after 50 days or so, he died on February 14th, 869 AD. And again, there is a discrepancy in the calendar because there has been a reform, but bear with me, we are still in the beginning of our talks about Bulgaria and Orthodoxy. So Pope Adrian himself performed Saint Cyril's funeral in the Church of Saint Clement of Rome. The life of Saint Cyril was written by Saint Clement of Ohrid, or Sveti Clement Ohridski, with the direct cooperation of Saint Methodius, Archbishop of Moravia, brother of Saint Cyril. And in the future, I will introduce you to the life of Saint Clement of Ohrid in another video, because he is one of the many great saints of Bulgaria. So his office is very ancient, and it has been preserved and has survived to date in 12 manuscripts, the oldest of which date from the 11th century. Okay, so the educational activity of Saint Cyril and Methodius actually became commensurate, or like comparable to the works of Christ's holy apostles. Their work actually challenged and thwarted the Roman Empire's aspirations to subjugate the Slavs, to enslave them under their power and Latin language. At the time, there were three popular languages that were accepted by the Latins, and that was Greek, Hebrew, and Latin. And so we very well know today that a person's mindset and understanding are tightly connected to his or her native tongue, and vice versa. One's native language can open doors to freedom by offering opportunities to learn and enrich oneself with knowledge. But the Roman Empire wanted to take humans' rights to this freedom, basic human freedom. And so the brothers Cyril and Methodius took this podvig. Remember, in previous videos I've mentioned this is a word that we use for challenge, a great risk. And so they defended these basic human rights. For this reason, Cyril and Methodius were subjected to accusations in Venice, today's Italian territory. The Pope in Rome was at that time the first Orthodox bishop, and so the brothers boldly overthrew the heretics, and they personally defended before the Pope in Rome the right to perform divine services and sermons in the Old Bulgarian language. This took place in 869 AD. Here's an excerpt that I would love to read to you guys of what Cyril said in his defense of the rights of the Slavic people. He said, "Does not God reign equally for all? Also, doesn't the sun shine on everyone? Don't we all breathe the same air? How is it that you are not ashamed by defining only 3 languages, but you want all other tribes and people to be blind and deaf? Tell me, do you think God is powerless so that he cannot give this? Or do you think him envious so that he does not want to give people their right to understand the holy book in their own language? We know many people who have books and glorify God each in their own language. It is known that such are the Armenians, Persians, Abkhazs, Avars, Sugs, Goths, Avars, Tirsi, Khazars, Arabs, Egyptians, Syrians, and many others. So what? I will pray with the spirit, but I will also pray with the mind. I will sing with spirit, but I will also sing with mind. If you bless only in spirit, how will one who is of the common people say Amen to your prayer, if he does not understand what you are saying? You praise God well, but the other does not learn. I thank my God that I speak in tongues more than all of you, but in church I prefer to say 5 words that will be understood in order to teach and reach others, rather than 1,000 words in an unknown language." Imagine this speech being held at the Roman Empire at the time, in front of the emperor. I wish they could make a movie about this. I'll just leave it at that. So Saint Cyril left a rich literary work, and he performed many miracles of faith during his lifetime. He ended his earthly journey in Rome at only 42 years of age. Saint Methodius interceded for the grave so that his miraculous relics would be placed in the altar of the Basilica St. Clement in Rome, which at that time was an Orthodox church. And so the Holy Brothers Cyril and Methodius laid the foundations of Christian Europe, which is why they are recognized as its co-patrons even today, and the Orthodox Church honors them as equal to the apostles. Bulgaria celebrates them in February and especially so in May as part of a national celebration, as I mentioned to you guys a little earlier, and I will talk a little more in later videos closer to May. So I would love to share another story that has been shared about Saint Cyril, Slavo-Bulgarian, that I found in one of the resources, which by the way I'm always including in the comments section. They come from the Bulgarian language. I am translating and I'm trying to convert them to the English language so that they can be understandable and accessible. So the story goes like this. It tells us that according to the well-known short biography of Constantine, the philosopher called Cyril in monasticism, he came from the noble parents, again Leo and Maria, who were Slavs from the Thessaloniki region. The high position of the father and the rich gifts of the boy opened the doors of the famous Magnur school in Constantinople at the time, where Constantine, or Cyril, studied together with the children of the Byzantine kings and Buliari, these were the rich kids, under the guidance of famous teachers and the learned Photius, or Photi, the future patriarch of Constantinople. Having completed his education with the nickname philosopher, he was appointed patriarchal librarian and professor of philosophy. Various commissions of a public nature were assigned to him, but he became bored with the vanity of this world, so he left. So he escaped secretly to the monastery where he joined his brother, and then he prepared the special work. So it kind of confirms there are various sources like that that have been written not only in Bulgaria but by foreigners as well that overlap. So we're going to get a little deeper and deeper into this whole situation, because I would love to share an article by Serafimov. I would love to share with you guys an article by Pavel Serafimov, who has done an incredible job of in-depth research and writings and publications on Bulgaria and the Bulgarian history. And so this in specifically is called The Mystery of the Moravian Mission of Cyril and Methodius. So there are hardly any Bulgarians who do not have any deep respect for the feet of these brothers. For some of us, that day in May 24th, holds an almost religious significance. The celebration is nationwide and tremendous. True Bulgarians remember these enlighteners and give them the honor that they deserve. People are usually grateful for the good works of people, but it is deplorable and it's a great pity that our scientists in modern day in general have not put effort to explore nor to reveal the whole truth concerning the origin of Cyril and Methodius and the reason for their mission. Regarding the ethnicity of these brothers, there can be no doubt, Serafimov says, at all that they are indeed Bulgarian. And it has been confirmed that their native dialect was not Macedonian, but of the Rhodope region. And all of these are Bulgarian regions. I will cover Macedonian region in the future, so stay tuned because that's another very deep and hot topic. It is also known that the grandfather of the Thessaloniki Brothers, Cyril and Methodius, was a nobleman from the court of Prince Kardam, but he was forced to leave Bulgaria due to differences in views of the rulers. although the brothers grew up in the Roman Empire, that was Byzantine at the time, Byzantium, Cyril and Methodius were Bulgarian in their self-awareness, and they mastered the Bulgarian speech to perfection. And so this deserves a side note. As I've mentioned before, I myself am an immigrant who has lived more years in the West than in my own native country of Bulgaria. However, I preserve my Bulgarian heritage, spirit, faith, beliefs, language, nationality, and as well as resources that are physically and emotionally present in my country of Bulgaria, as well as where I live abroad. Many people have asked me, why didn't you leave your things in Bulgaria? Why didn't you abandon those completely? That's in my heart. That's how we Bulgarians have preserved national awareness, self-awareness, and our roots, identity, and being, not just for centuries, but for millennia. That is a treasury, and I keep it deep in my heart. Wherever I go, there I am. By the way, this also is very similar in spirit, pretty much the same mindset of an Orthodox Christian. Our kingdom is in heaven. We are sojourners here, and we are to carry that kingdom in our hearts. So bearing in mind all of these facts, it is difficult to find an explanation for the view that has been introduced and imposed on the official theories, or by the official theories, that that claim that the Holy Brothers Cyril and Methodius began their work not in our country Bulgaria, but in Moravia, not in Pliska, which is one of the old Bulgarian capitals, and still is a location there, a city, but in Velegrad, not in the court of Prince Boris I, who was a Bulgarian ruler, but under Prince Rastislav. So, at first glance, this seems a rather strange and completely illogical act or perception, because why would people with Bulgarian self-awareness ignore their brothers and sisters, their compatriots, their people, and why would they go help another nation? And also, why would Constantine, Cyril, and Methodius not go directly to Pliska, to Boris, our ruler in Bulgaria, but they went instead to Moravia, where, according to the official versions, the local Prince Rastislav invited them. So in order to understand this, we must first pay attention to a few questions, as Seraphimov says. For example, who were the old inhabitants of the so-called Great Moravia? And what was the situation in which they were at the beginning of the 9th century exactly? Well, the name of the country, or the state, so-called Moravia, comes from the name of the river Morava, which is also called Margus in ancient times. The Moravia visited by Cyril and Methodius coincides with the territory of the Roman region in Asia Minor, or Moesia. And there is a quote that they add, which says that the location of the activities of Constantine and Methodius and the later Methodian archdiocese was the so-called Great Moravia in Roman Asia Minor, or Moesia. So here is a detail. In the 4th century, Asia Minor, or Mysia, was also called Bulgaria by Saint Jerome. From this period until the 15th century, various authors called the Bulgarians Mysis, or minors, or Asia Minors. In other words, for 1,100 years, 1,100 years, you guys, there was a public formal identification of our Bulgarian ancestors with the largest Thracian people, of which I already spoke in one of the earliest episodes. Feel free to check them out. I have named them accordingly. So Bulgarians and Thracians are the same. Thanks to these facts, we understand that during antiquity, the lands of Moravia mainly belonged to the Mysis, or the Mysis, which later were called the Bulgarians. Of course, in addition to that, The Dardanians or Tribals, Illyrians were also like Thracian tribes that also lived in Moravia. So the latter are people who are close relatives of our ancestors, and they were called Thracians during antiquity. Not only historical sources though, but even archaeological data prove that our ancestors lived on the territory of Moravia. Thanks to the studies of Nikola Dušek and others, and again I'm including the main websites of where I'm taking this information. Feel free to check my comments in the video. It becomes clear that even in ancient times, Slovakia was inhabited by Thracians. Those people did not evaporate. They didn't just disappear out of the blue. And there is no evidence of their complete destruction by any enemy in any writings, historical documents, right? So in a report of the Varna Archaeological Society, Varna is a city in Bulgaria on the Black Sea. I was born in Varna. You can check it on the map. This was a report from the year of 1907. So 1907. There is a very interesting passage in which it is claimed that the Czech scientists are interested in excavations in Pliska, which is in Bulgaria, located in Bulgaria, because they assume that Velegrad in Moravia is similar in structure to the Bulgarian capital. Pliska was the Bulgarian old capital. It was also specified that in Velegrad, similar runic signs were found on stones as in Pliska, which was named Aboba, also another name. I mean, words have evolved over time. You have to really follow the timeline and the evolution of those words to catch the thread. During the time of the Thessaloniki Brothers, Cyril and Methodius, there was no significant change in the ethnic composition of the population of the country that was ruled by Prince Rostislav. Descendants of Mizis, Tribals, Dardans, and so forth still lived there. Again, these are diverse tribes that were states within the Thracians, the Thracian nation. This explains why in the older chronicles the name Rostislav is rendered as Rastis, and Rastis is a Thracian name. The same applies to other princes' names or rulers' names. They simply evolve under a new variant of their ancient names. The most important detail is that people in Moravia speak the same language that is spoken in Bulgaria. Precisely for this, in the letter of Emperor Michael III to Rostislav, it is said that Constantine Kirill, understand the philosopher Saint Cyril, already spoke the Moravian language. So, Moravian, Bulgarian, he already spoke that language. Researchers actually note that during the time of Boris I, and Boris was the Bulgarian ruler, Moravia was part of the Bulgarian state, therefore the language was one and the same. Moravian was Bulgarian language. No matter how wise a certain person is, Serafimov reminds us, learning a foreign language requires time and physical immersion, like presence. You have to be among the people speaking the language in order to really grasp it. I know myself because I've studied multiple languages, and it was different at the time when I learned English. It was very different from my experience specifically in an English-speaking country. Same thing I've experienced with French, same I've experienced with other languages. So in the past as well as today, there has been a tendency to present Moravia as a separate country from Bulgaria. But as we now see, in reality, its inhabitants were of the exact same origin as the people from Bulgaria. Moravia is nothing but a principality, like a state, subordinate to the Bulgarian rulers or the Bulgarian kingdom, in which the main population is the same as in our own country. And you guys can also look at how, the United States of America has states. Every state speaks English. This is pretty easy to understand in modern terms as well. One of our ancient Bulgarian rulers, Khan Omurtak, actually sent his army along the Drava in 827 AD and 829 AD. So think about this. He was a wise ruler, and a ruler like himself would not start a military campaign that could lead to serious conflict unless it concerns actions that were aimed at preserving the original Bulgarian territories. He was actually trying to preserve and claim back what was being divided at the time. So when Germans and Hungarians destroyed Great Moravia, those of its inhabitants who survived and whom the aggressors did not manage to capture actually moved to Bulgaria. So this is yet another significant sign, or like Serafimov says, it's a strong indication that Bulgarians have a sense of a national belonging and national spirit, consciousness. We Bulgarians preserve our language, culture, faith, traditions, customs, no matter where we are, regardless of geography, regardless of the age and the era. So Pavel Serafimov, who has researched, written, and published, like I said, a lot and in depth, in an incredible depth about Bulgarian history and those details that I'm sharing with you guys, notes that if there had been no foreign intervention over time, Moravia would have doubtless merged with Bulgaria and a huge state would have been formed. But it is precisely this that was the greatest nightmare for both the Roman Empire, Byzantium at the time, and the Germanic kings. The Bulgarian ancient ruler, Khan Omurtak, undertook punitive campaigns against King Louis the Pious. Bulgaria, as the home of all the descendants of the old Balkan peoples and their relatives, would not only be the strongest and largest kingdom in Europe, but also a real threat to the Franks and the Romans, again Byzantines, for the simplest reason that they spread to our original, the root land, the motherlands. And so logically, Bulgarians later were actually making attempts and demands to return their original territories, our original territories that had been divided and stolen from us. In order to avoid having to come to this point, both the Germans and the Romans, again Byzantines, took preventative measures against the integration of Moravia into the bosom of the Bulgarian state. So in the year of 865 AD, as a result of the intervention of the German clergy and the German nobility, Pope Stephen V abandoned the worship in the original language of the Moravian population, which was Bulgarian language. In the following year, 866 AD, the so-called revolt of the Boilies, I don't know how you would say it in English, Boilies. Those were people who were against the introduction of Christianity. There was a revolt that broke out in Bulgaria. And so in reality, that rebellion was an attempt at the overthrowing of Prince Boris, our ruler, Boris I. So the motifs had nothing to do with religion. It was at that time more like territory and tradition based. Only a year later, which was in 867 AD, Basil I organized the destruction or the assassination of Emperor Michael III, who had Phrygian blood in his veins. So he had been the man who supported the Holy Brothers in the activity useful for Bulgaria. So it is evident, you guys can see, how our adversaries were greatly frightened, or they would not have acted so quickly. When we compare the events of all those years, 865, 866, 867, it literally becomes clear that they are not random at all. And rather, it's been well organized, kind of like a well organized campaign, conspiracy against Bulgarians. And this is not the only conspiracy against Bulgarians in our history. Like I said, there will be many videos in the future I'll include. This is also evident from the subsequent alliance that Emperor Basil I and King Louis II concluded in 870 AD. So in just 5 years, the situation around our ancestors became pretty tense, and nonetheless they managed to take a firm hold of it, and so they endured in spite of it, in spite of those plots. So the enemies of Bulgaria have been waging wars against Bulgaria, not only with fire and sword, but also in other ways like slander, conspiracies, and countless attempts like lies and deception, attempts to divide our nation, our ancestors. So then every chunk that they managed to separate from the bosom of the Bulgarian country, nation, kingdom at the time, or the people, the Bulgarian people, that, every single chunk that was separated was then subjected to cultural assimilation. Again, I will talk about the Macedonian situation and assimilation pretty soon. It's quite wild, you guys. It's so wild. Okay, so in the middle of the 9th century, Bulgaria was a strong kingdom that successfully withstood the pressures from the Frank kingdom, ancient French, and the Roman Empire or Byzantium. However, Bulgaria's subjected state of Moravia had fewer resources in people as well as financially. This made the Moravian state region an easy prey for the Germanic kings who sought to impose their influence, and in time they actually took complete power over the conquered population that was in that region. So this writer and researcher Pavel Serafimov states that the purpose of the Moravian mission of Cyril and Methodius was to protect the Bulgarians from the dynamics that were occurring in the outskirts of our country. Familiar already with the policy of the Roman Empire, Byzantium again, and with the ambitions of the German rulers to expand the territories, the lands, the territories of their countries towards the east, the Holy Brothers Cyril and Methodius did everything possible to strengthen the Bulgarian language. Moravia was, as a territory, may have been lost to us, but with the introduction of the Glagolythic alphabet in our country, the right to worship in the Bulgarian language, our state was in fact being strengthened. I think that's a time for a break. I'm going to add a little bit about the Glagolythic alphabet versus the Cyrillic alphabet. This is a very overbrushed and undermined and even minimized event in history. Many people nowadays completely ignore and misunderstand that the Cyrillic alphabet is actually not Glagolythic. So I'm getting all excited here about all this information. So the Glagolythic alphabet is different from the Cyrillic alphabet. It is not by chance that the time of the Bulgarian ruler Simeon the Great, he was a king, a Bulgarian king, is actually known as the Golden Age in Bulgaria. At that time, our Bulgarian country became a spiritual leader to all of the nations around. So in the 9th and the 10th centuries, Bulgarians were well known of their role of strengthening the countries or the states, as well as building a strong foundation to the culture, within the culture of the people from nearby states and regions. In 1923, the linguist Max Fesmer emphasized the role that Bulgarian writers and clergy undertook in the shaping of the languages of Russians, Serbians, and so forth. We're talking about Slavic nations that are using and used to use Cyrillic because many of them have changed that too, and I'll talk about it in the future. Academician and Professor E. Georgiev writes about the influence of the literary work, Enlightenment, like we call it, of Cyril and Methodius on the Czechs, Slovaks, Polish people, the people from Slovenia, the people from Croatia, and all this is described in his work, Our Alphabets, as we would say in Bulgarian language, Naștu azbuki. And again, you guys, this is coming from Pavel Serafimov's research that I've included in the comments section. A clear and frank recognition of the contribution of our ancestors comes from Professor N. Tunitsky, who says that, quote, at the time when Western European nations could not even think about national languages in worship, when among the Western Slavs the remnants of a folk church and Slavic writing were gradually dying out, and among the Serbs and Croatians the first steps of enlightenment were barely taken, when Russia was still completely pagan, an independent Slavic church was created in Bulgaria that lasted for several decades with a common language and spirituality. That was the point when the Slavic Enlightenment reached unprecedented success in its development. I have heard from rather ignorant people that the word Slav has been mistranslated in some, or into some, like in the English language by some English speakers who assumed that it means slaves. This, you guys, this blew my mind. This literally was such a raw and incompetent mistake, and I was thinking, I have no idea who came up with this, but I thought I need to include this. I really need to talk about it in my video and popularize and catch it as soon as possible. It has nothing to do with what our language is expressing and what Slavyanin means in our language. Let's remember that English as a Latin language is completely different from Bulgarian and the other forms of that, which we call nowadays the Slavic languages. So Slavyani comes from Slava in our language, which means glory. So in simple words, Slavyani, the Slavic people, literally means the people who is glorified, the people with glory, the people of glory, the glorious people with the glorious works who accomplish the glorious works. This is what Slavyani means, you guys. When you talk, when somebody asks you, and if you ever hear anybody say in the English language that Slavic derives from slave, this is insane. As a matter of fact, the brothers Cyril and Methodius did what they did. They undertook the risks that they took in order to fight the slavery that was being attempted at the local people. So may this be well known throughout the world. May this be really well memorized, because that would be a grave and ignorant mistake. So that we, not fall into irrationality and illogical kind of assumptions when we talk about things as deep as these. We're discussing here two completely separate systems of languages. English is not at all the same as Bulgarian language, and let's just use the proper translations. More recognition by linguists actually came in the second half of the 20th century, such as Professor Dr. Kirai, who is a professor of Slavic studies in Budapest University. And so he shares, I'm quoting, that the Old Bulgarian language has a huge role in the cultural development of Central Europe. The work of Cyril and Methodius and their students is truly epoch-making, like era-making, formative of an age, of a new age of its own. And the limits of their contribution are yet to be defined. Professor J. Lindstedt, who is the head of the Department of the Slavic Philology at the University of Helsinki, also gives high praise by stating that The important thing is that when I teach the students of Slavic philology who are studying the Old Bulgarian language, I emphasize to them that this language is actually basically at the root of all Slavic languages. End of quote. Another professor, his name is Shoichi Kimura. He is the president of the Japanese Slavic Association, and so he says, for centuries the Latin language was studied with great difficulty because it was accessible only to the most educated people of those times. The Old Bulgarian language is a great gift given by the brothers Cyril and Methodius to the Slavs because it was accessible to them. In the Middle Ages, religion and culture were one and the same thing. This is precisely why the work of Cyril and Methodius has great cultural significance. What they created is genius, truly timeless. It has been handed down from century to century, right up to modern times. End of quote. And yet there is another quote that follows. The view of Jan Jendzie, associate professor of Bulgarian philology at Peking University, who is also saying something interesting. I'm quoting again. Thanks to the works of Cyril and Methodius and their students, Bulgaria early accepted the cultural heritage of humanity with the help of its writing, preserved and developed its cultural tradition and its national character, became one of the countries with a developed culture in the Middle Ages. Pavel Serafimov also rightly reminds us that more words of praise can be added about the work of the Holy Brothers, much more can be said about their feet or their podvig, like we say, but the more important thing is to understand that the glory of our Bulgarian ancestors is not like a medal with which we can boast, but an example that we are bound to follow. He says, to be a descendant of nobles, you must act like a noble. To be a true Bulgarian, you must follow the path of light and of goodness. That is so huge. How can I not be inspired by that? And especially going back to my previous episodes where I spoke about the ancestors of Europeans, the defenders of Europe, the savior of Europe. If you guys watch my first earlier episodes, I'm pretty sure that Europeans would relate with Bulgaria as well. And it needs to be known to the world. This is information that sadly has been eradicated from our study books in previous decades. And I'm glad that now people are speaking up about it. Božidar Dimitrov sensationally writes an article on the alphabet that belongs to Clement and Boris and not to Cyril and Methodius. Okay? Prepare for a little more as we enter the heat of this conversation yet by another level. And I take my little pauses because things get heated and they get deeper and deeper with more research. Remember how I mentioned earlier in this video that the Cyrillic alphabet is not Glagolythic. So realistically speaking, Cyril and Methodius created the Glagolythic alphabet. It's not Cyrillic. So let's talk about what actually happened. They deserve merit, great merit, with regards to this alphabet, with regards to defending the rights of our people. But let's add this additional fact here. So the Thessaloniki Brothers managed to break through the system that forbade Bulgarians to have their own writing. The famous historian and professor Božidar Dimitrov sent to the media a sensational reading of the story of who, how, and where actually wrote the Bulgarian alphabet. According to him, the letters are the work of Clement and Boris. And Clement is a saint. I will talk about his life in another video. The Thessaloniki brothers, Cyril and Methodius, have great merit because they broke through the system that forbade Bulgarians to have their own writing. We Bulgarians know from elementary school that the year of 863 AD, in voice of the great Moravian prince Rostislav, this is the year when his envoys arrived at the Byzantine Emperor Michael III with a request to send him teachers to preach in the Slavic language. The Byzantine rulers granted Rostislav's request and sent to Moravia the already prominent missionaries who worked among the Slavs, and those were Cyril and Methodius. In Great Moravia, they created written symbols and worship in the Slavic language. So they used the phonetics, the sounds, and they created, like I said, those symbols. The task of Cyril and Methodius was to achieve the canonical recognition of the alphabet by the then authorities on the matter. Those were the Patriarchate of Constantinople and the papacy. On top of everything else, at that time, the trilingual dogma, remember how I mentioned that was in force in the Roman Empire? It was basically only recognizing the Greek language, the Latin language, and the Hebrew language. So in 863 through 865, the Bulgarian Tsar Boris converted to Christianity in order to unite the Bulgarian people. As a side note, I have already mentioned in a previous episode that ancient Bulgarians were already Christians, and it has been evidenced in many resources, including the ancient ruler Han Tervel, who is also the savior of Europe. However, Tsar Boris I, our Bulgarian ruler later on, actually united the Bulgarians under one faith, and that was done as a formality. So he came to power in 852, and he ruled a huge territory from Budapest to Edirne, not sure how you say in English, and like from the mouth of the Dniester and Dnieper to today's Albanian territory. Tsar Boris wanted the acceptance of Christianity, and so he was aware of the foreign policy situation as an act of international recognition. He was also aware of the fundamental internal situation, which was the creation of a common code for the diverse population of the people, consisting of dozens of ethnic tribes, but he was aware that this great mix of nationalities could be held together by one faith, one law, and one language. Christianity goes along with its laws, unified as early as the 6th century by the Justinian Code. It's just mentioned, and I thought it's curious to share with you guys. Moreover, our Tsar Boris I was given the opportunity to create a script that would be valid for everybody, and so that you wouldn't see some people writing their own runes, or like other people would have been writing using strokes or like shapes like the Slavs, or yet other people would have been writing in Greek, and yet other people would have been writing in the Latin language. He wanted no such division. So the fact is that in the year of 855 AD, with the knowledge of Boris I, Cyril and Methodius conducted a mission in East Macedonia. So we're speaking of regions only. Again, bear with me. Macedonia will be discussed in a separate video of its own, because that's a very misunderstood and, Lord have mercy, it's been very misconceived history and information. Anyways, I'm coming back to on topic here. So there they baptized about 54,000 Slavs, and there are suggestions that even Tsar Boris was baptized in that year, because in a Byzantine source that was called Legend of Bregalny, it is said that Boris I, our Tsar or king, was baptized in the city of Raven near Shtip. They thought that this was a legend, but it turned out that it was not. And there have been actually resources that have proven this. So in the year of 886 AD, Cyril had already passed away. Methodius also passed away in that year. Well, so their students were arrested, they were sent to prison, they were sold into slavery, more than 200 people. But it was only a few of them, 5 of them, that actually stood out because it was their fate. We believe that they actually had more work to do. And those were the students Clement, Gorazd, Naum, Angelarius, and Sava. They were taken out of prison, they were escorted to the Bulgarian border near Belgrade, and from there they were transferred to the other side of the Danube River. So here's what happened. Tsar Boris I, basically they say, and here I'm quoting, he picked up the phone, they say, and he told the German king that the Bulgarians had fooled them several times and would fool them again if they did not let his subjects go. Bold tone, right? So the German king responded with his famous statement that it was not worth spoiling his relationship with the Bulgarian country over 5 monks. So then he let them go. So they arrived in Bulgaria, and at that point, Tsar Boris I ventured on a ginormous endeavor that even by today's standard would rather stand as unbelievable, inconceivable. It concerned the introduction of Christianity in the native language in all churches in Bulgaria. So this was incredibly costly in material as well as effort at that time, because books were written on parchment and not on paper. They didn't have printers, of course, like we do nowadays. And parchment is actually well-treated skin from a young animal, like lamb or something else. And basically they say that a maximum of 4 to 6 sheets could be made from one single skin. This is an expensive technological operation, you guys can see, that requires special knowledge and skill of a certain type of people. And another thing was needed. There were no printers, so people had to actually write those things by hand. They had to hire somebody to do that work. So that involved the making of frames, the production of enterprising of books, printers, writing, physical location. They had to find actual physical locations for this job. And at the time when the students came to Boris, our ruler, there were only 5 of them. They were literate, and they had a dozen books in their bags. Now, the information that I read was also interesting because it talks about, it kind of like invites us to do some math here. Let's calculate how many books they actually had to produce. So since the Christian religion is the only one professed by a book, that the collection of books that every church should have, every Orthodox church should have, at that point comes to about 20 to 22 books. All this work required the death of 20 to 25 million lambs, respectively. And so the processing of their skins, as well as the separation from like economic to military life of 20,000 young men who were also expected to become priests, was involved. This could not have happened without the country's or the kingdom's resources and without political intervention by our Bulgarian king Boris I. It's very easy and tempting to give up when you see what the costs are. But Tsar Boris remained steadfast, and he endured to the end of this task, and thankfully he also lived a long time. So this job was assigned to the 5 disciples that I mentioned, and so they were sent to different parts of the Bulgarian kingdom. Saint Clement was sent in Ohrid. Clearly that was a Bulgarian region. That was Bulgaria, and Ohrid nowadays is being associated with Macedonia. I am itching to talk to you about it, but I will postpone that and take breaths here. So Saint Clement was sent in Ohrid. Gorazd and Angelarius were sent in Berat, Albania. Naum remained in Pliska in Bulgaria. And he created dozens of monasteries, which were actually the locations where this kind of work was accomplished at the time. The work lasted from 886 to 893 AD. Clement trained 3,500 3,500 students only within 7 years. And it's worthy, of consideration if Naum and the others, could prepare that many people. That means that, we already would have had the necessary 10,000 priests, or like the necessary number of, population being trained and becoming literate. Just wanted to bring this to your attention because it kind of shows how acculturated, literate the Bulgarian nation has been. So here comes the big question. The brothers Cyril and Methodius wrote the Glagolythic script. So it was this alphabet that they brought. But today we don't write in Glagolythic. We Slavic people and in the Balkans, we're actually using the Cyrillic alphabet. Russians, Serbians, of course, Bulgarians, we're using Cyrillic alphabet, which is completely different in terms of graphic outlines, shapes, and forms. So who created this other alphabet and where was it created? So the Byzantine writer and saint Theophylact of Ohrid, again Bulgarian, and again I will talk about him in a separate video sometime in the future. He writes that while working with his students, Saint Clement of Ohrid noticed that they had a hard time mastering the graphics of the new letters, and so they invented a new system, new letters that were simpler, more legible, and more beautiful. It is perfectly clear that the alphabet we call Cyrillic today was created by Saint Clement of Ohrid. But this is not a simple job, right? To create an alphabet and to put it into practical use all over the country, to popularize it, this cannot be done without a formal decision and imposition by the ruler. So a person like Boris the First, Tsar Boris. So Theophylact of Ohrid also brought to our attention that they convinced the Tsar that it was very difficult for them to learn the previously hard to outline letters, and so the Tsar agreed on a new alphabet that the Bulgarians were already familiar with and they already knew. What did they know? So 15 of the letters of this Cyrillic alphabet, the Bulgarian alphabet, are Greek, and they're very well known by our scribes at least. And another 15 of those letters are actually signs from the Proto-Bulgarians, that's the ancient Bulgarian runic script, which are given a phonetic and not an isographic meaning as they had until then. So you guys can see that the Bulgarian alphabet consists of 30 total letters. You may see a symbol being added or taken by a few other Slavic countries, but they're using pretty much the same alphabet. Some authors say that this is a kind of medieval Bulgarian patriotism. So there are some examples with some letters. I'm not going to give you those because they're so different from the English language that it would only serve as to confuse you guys, but I'll leave you with that to ponder. So it is more than certain that today's alphabet that was created by Saint Clement, again, with the sanction or the order of the king, the Bulgarian king Boris the First, Tsar Boris the First, and with the powerful resource that he invested into the creation and the copying of those books. So a final question remains, where was the Cyrillic alphabet created? And so they say that it is clear where these things were decided in the capital of Bulgaria. There the decisions were made, after which money was thrown to be built next to the cathedral church of the city, like the Great Basilica, which is the one that has now been restored in Bulgaria with funds of the Bulgarian country, the Bulgarian state, and countless donors. Also the largest monastery that could exist anywhere in the Christian world, that is on several tens of acres there. This monastery was quite luxurious. Even it had like water closets, they say. It was supplied with fresh water. A Everything was just luxuriously equipped, you can imagine. All kinds of great conditions were created in order to create the books that would be sent around the vast Bulgarian land, as well as the on foreign missions such as Russia, Krakow, Prague, and so forth. Božidar Dimitrov states that we Bulgarians have explicit information about this, and that as such, by restoring the great basilica and the monastery next to it, we actually must know that we are restoring not just the church, but also the place where our spirituality was born. So when we mention Cyril and Methodius, we truly should also mention that after all, the creation of our current Cyrillic alphabet is indeed created by Saint Clement of Ohrid, who is Bulgarian. Saint Cyril and Methodius have done a lot. They broke, as they say, the system that forbade us to have our own alphabet. They were also the authors of the idea that there could be such an alphabet, a common alphabet, but the real implementer of the Cyrillic alphabet, as we know it today, and on which the Slavic countries write, is actually Saint Clement of Ohrid, the Bulgarian. That was where our spirituality was indeed born. So I'm just going to mention a few conclusions, just to kind of begin to wrap this up. This whole thing means that Church Slavonic is not Russian language, as commonly I've heard people say this, and living abroad, people will say, so what language do you speak? Do you speak Russian? Do you have your own language at all? I mean, can you guys grasp this? If you come from a place that was that popular and so worldly renowned, and it gave the alphabet, the written system and culture to other main countries around, and then you immigrate and people ask you, hey, do you have a language of your own? It blows my mind, and for this I was actually very bullied and humiliated abroad, and I've known people who just minimized and mocked me so long, and I just I mustered up the courage in the end. It really took many years, maybe 25 years, to say, okay, I'm gonna share this with the world. I'm gonna make these videos no matter how they go, with or without my video editing expertise, which I lack clearly. But at least I can communicate this information, for the benefit of all, so that all can be aware and enlightened and knowledgeable. The Church Slavonic, the Slavonic language does derive its roots from the Bulgarian language. That's why when I go to a Christian Orthodox church and they chant in Slavonic, I understand it. That's why when I speak to a Russian and I've never taken Russian language, or Ukrainian, or a Serbian, they can speak in their language and I can speak in my own language, and we understand each other by anywhere from 80% to 90%. Of course, language evolves, over time, but it's that easy. So it's like different dialects, and still within the Bulgarian country, as it is nowadays, we have tons of different dialects. Even visiting my husband's family, we joke with each other's dialects because they're so different, and sometimes we have to translate for each other because some words are so drastically different, but they're still Bulgarian, and some are being used as they were in the ancient form, and some others have evolved. So it is Old Bulgarian language, as Cyril and Methodius created the Slavic alphabet based in the lingual dialects and sounds of Bulgaria, the region that they occupied and walked at that time, or walked on at that time. These two holy brothers, again, Cyril and Methodius, laid the foundations of Christian Europe. For this reason, they are recognized as the co-patrons today of Europe. And the Orthodox Church honors them as equal to the apostles. And so Bulgaria gave language and alphabet to the rest of the Slavic world. This is much of the reason why some of you may notice that East Europeans understand each other. Just a cool fact. Today's Slavonic alphabet, which is currently being used in about 300 million, by 300 million people, is called Cyrillic in honor of Saint Cyril the philosopher. Many people are actually deceived by believing that Saint Cyril and Methodius created this alphabet. The reality is that they did not invent the Cyrillic alphabet. They created the Glagolythic alphabet, which in fact is difficult for writing and reading, and that's why it was changed to Cyrillic alphabet by Saint Clement of Ohrid. Today's so-called Cyrillic alphabet was in fact invented by the order of the Bulgarian Tsar Boris I, by the student of Cyril and Methodius, Saint Clement of Ohrid. At that time in Ohrid was taking place the first Bulgarian country. That's where also was located the Bulgarian Patriarchy. So the Macedonian territory issue will come in a future video, and Saint Clement of Ohrid's life will be mentioned in the future. The information is so much, so rich that I feel like a whole lifetime wouldn't be enough for me. I can only share at this point how I remember that when I was a child in elementary, middle, and high school in Bulgaria, I was literally overwhelmed and I would panic with my history classes. I would sit there, and I have a personal memory of how my mom said one day, "That's it, Gloria, you're going to sit today, you're going to study on your own. You have to learn how to be independent." And I remember reading my history lesson over and over and over, and I could not memorize. I was so lost. And nowadays we have Google. We click, we go to Wikipedia, we find automatically electronic files. But back in the day, I only had a book, dictionary. I had the library where I had to commute on foot to. And I was overwhelmed with all these names. Nowadays, when I go to Wikipedia and I see a bunch of unknown names, I can click on them. Who is Cyril? Who is Methodius? Click, go there. Who is Clement of Ohrid? Click, and I can go and see that. But that wasn't the case when I was a student, and it was pretty intimidating. But I'm also so thankful and so glad to be able to, review all of my studies and all of my knowledge and enrich it, because as I present and I share with you guys, I'm doing so much research nowadays. I feel like a student myself. I feel like much of this was not only difficult to grasp, but it was also not presented, especially during and after, the communist rule and a lot of other perversions that happened within the educational system. So I'm actually very glad and I'm very thankful for this opportunity. So thank you once again for joining me with this presentation at Nasedianka. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. If you are interested in more future videos like this that are informative, I'm not a professional. I strive to learn more and more about how to edit videos, how to add pictures, how to enrich this, but having a full-time job is not easy. And I'm pretty much just gathering all my articles and all my information. I translate this in my free and spare time, and then I just bring it here. So that's what's happening so far. We'll see what comes in the future. But I appreciate you, and I hope that you have a great rest of the week. And until we say do novi srešti, I don't know how to translate this until, except that I can say, we say in Bulgarian, until we see each other again. Thank you. Bye-bye.